If you can hear me, clap once. If you can hear me, clap twice. Awesome. You guys are so good. You're like educators or something. Is anyone in here an LPC? Wait a second, Ryan. An LPC, an LMFT, or a nurse? I have CEUs. Ryan, will you take the other CEUs to the other room? We're going to send some CEUs to you for those of you who are being live streamed right now. Anybody else? Thanks. Okay. Raise them high if you got them. Awesome. Anybody else? Did I miss anybody? Sorry. Okay, everybody will get a PD certificate at the end of the day today. Everyone will get one, so you don't have to worry about that. Where's my clicker? Clicker, yay! Thank you for keeping me straight. Okay, there's a seat right, is there somebody sitting right here? Here's a seat right here, and there's a seat over here, but we are live streaming in 121. We're live streaming that as well. So today we're going to talk about working with a traumatized student. It is by far the most popular session that I teach, as you can see. Additionally, it's probably my favorite session that I teach because it impacts all of us and everything that we do with our students. My name is Michelle Sutherland. I'm the Director of Prevention Services for the State Department of Education. I'm really happy that you're here today. I'm a licensed school counselor. I worked at a middle school for 5 years, at a Title I middle school, 700 kids, 3 counselors, 3 principals, 65 teachers. You kind of get the idea. It was one of the lower performing middle schools at the time when I took the job as a counselor there. I did that for 5 years, and then the next year, I worked as a student advocacy coordinator at Norman North. There were some rapes that happened at the other high school in town, and the girls felt bullied. And it was a result of a terrible circumstance. A task force was created, and they created 2 advocate positions at each high school to serve the entire district, and I was one of them. And at that position, all we did was trauma. That's all we dealt with was trauma. Sexual assault, abuse, neglect, anything negative or bad, we dealt with it. And so I became really passionate about trauma during that time, and I've done a lot of research and attended some really good trainings. And what I've done, we have a spot right here, and we're also live streaming in room 121. In 121 if you want to go there. What I wanted to do was create this session for you in an hour. I come out to schools and do this as well, so if you love it and you want me to come to your school, email me, get on my calendar, and I can come and do that too. So, or any other thing that I teach. I have a whole bunch of stuff that I teach. So, we, just like all educators, align to specific learning standards, and our learning standards today include resources and data. So what is trauma? Trauma is anything that happens to a person that changes their brain development. Some examples that you can obviously think of would be abuse or neglect, assault. You might think of a natural disaster or a sudden traumatic death. All very normal things that you would consider to be a traumatic experience. But anything can lead to trauma depending on the person and the circumstance. So I'm going to share something personal with you. I got a phobia. I have a phobia of vomit. And I know it sounds crazy, and I know nobody likes it. But I'm like panic attack, can't take care of my own children, sleep in the car sometimes type of situation. It's a serious situation. And I had that phobia because of a traumatic experience in 1st grade when my dad was sick and I thought he was dying. And the way it's been described to me, which I think is a really good description, it's like a 220 volt event in a 9 volt brain, and your wires get crossed, and you suddenly start relating 2 things that don't normally relate to each other. So anything can lead to a traumatic experience that changes the brain development. Being bit by a dog. Somebody in another session said they had a fear of ceiling fans because of a traumatic experience that happened to them. Some people don't drive over bridges. There are a lot of different things that can happen to you. that might seem normal or something you might be able to handle to the rest of us, but your brain is affected as a traumatic experience, and it changes the way it develops. So that's what we're talking about today. So to get started, I want to introduce you to Ben. He was such a cute baby. He was 9 pounds and 3 ounces. He had 10 fingers and 10 toes. He was a really healthy boy. He had a pretty normal APGAR score when he was born. He hit all his developmental milestones when he was supposed to. Sat up on time, crawled, walked, talked, all the things he was supposed to do. He did it within a normal amount of time. But when he was about 18 months old, people started noticing that Ben would hyper-focus on something. In this picture, he's hyper-focused on a Superman toy. The whole world could be collapsing around Ben. They could call his name, they could be tapping him on the shoulder, and he would not break his focus on this little toy. And that happened a lot. Then Ben went to school, and he was a cutie, but it wasn't very long before his teacher noticed that he had a tough guy complex. What I mean by that is he was knocking over blocks, he was taking toys from other kids, he was hitting, kicking, biting, pushing. He was really not doing very well in his pre-K classroom. In fact, the other thing that was happening a lot of the time was his teacher would notice that Ben would fall asleep in inappropriate times. Like they'd be at circle time reading a story, and she'd look over and Ben would be asleep on the kiddo next to him. As Ben grew, his anger started to develop more and more. Things started happening like Ben would destroy classrooms. He'd throw staplers, he'd flip over desks. They started having to clear the classroom when Ben would have a meltdown. He'd also cry at really inappropriate times, and all the time, at times when it wasn't normal for a kiddo to be crying. He continued to grow, and Ben became the kid who would suck in other kids to do naughty things with him. You know the one. You know what I'm talking about. Ben also would show up at school sometimes with marks. You can see right here on his cheek, he has a mark on his face. But he would have bruises and cuts and bumps. And when you ask Ben about these, he would give you an excuse like, oh, I got scratched by a tree limb, or my dog or my cat scratched me, or I fell down the stairs. And you didn't believe what he was telling you, but he wouldn't tell you anything differently. Ben was in a crisis, and he wasn't learning at school. So how many of you have heard of the ACE study, the Adverse Childhood Experience Study? A few of you have. So basically the ACE study is a 10-question survey. You can Google this and find it. It's not hard to find. That gives you a score. And the higher your score, the more likely you are to be at risk. The more likely bad things will happen. The more likely you are to drop out of high school, to have disease, to have early death, to have a substance abuse issue. Anything bad that you can think of, the higher your ACE score, the more likelihood you are to have that in your adulthood. So we're going to go through Ben's ACE score with you. So while you were growing up or during your first 18 years of life, did a parent or another adult in the household, often or very often, swear at you, insult you, put you down, or humiliate you, or act in a way that made you afraid that you might be physically hurt? Well, Ben was the oldest of 5 children, and they were back to back to back to back to back. He was frequently responsible for their care. Mom has bipolar disorder, and because she lives in poverty, she didn't feel like that she could afford health care, so she turned to street drugs, and now Mom is addicted to meth. Mom has a rotating cycle of men in the house all the time, dealers, other drug addicts, and so Ben is the primary caretaker for his siblings. He was afraid all the time that he would be hurt, and those marks that you saw were generally the result of abuse for Ben. So that's a 1 on the ACE score. Did a parent or other adult in the household, often or very often, push, grab, slap, or throw something at you, or ever hit you so hard that you had marks or were injured? We know the answer for Ben, unfortunately, is yes. So he's up to a 2. Did an adult person at least 5 years older than you ever touch or fondle you, or have you touch their body in a sexual way, or attempt to actually have oral, anal, or vaginal intercourse with you? If yes, enter 1. We don't know the answer for Ben, but we know that there were a lot of different people in and out, so we know it's a possibility. But we're not going to give him a 1 because we don't know for sure. Did you often or very often feel that no one in your family loved you or thought you were important or special? Or your family didn't look out for each other, feel close to each other, or support each other? You know, I told you that Ben had 4 younger siblings that he was responsible for. And if any of those siblings did anything wrong, Ben was the one paying the price for it. So Ben definitely didn't feel loved or special or cared for. So now we're up to a 3. Did you often or very often feel that you didn't have enough to eat, had to wear dirty clothes, and had no one to protect you? Or your parents were too drunk or high to take care of you or take you to the doctor if you needed it? The answer for Ben was yes, and now we're a 4. Were your parents ever separated or divorced? Well, Ben's parents were never married. In fact, when Ben was about 2 months old, his dad robbed a liquor store and got caught and went to prison, and Ben's never really met his dad that he can remember. So we're going to call that a 5. Was your mother or stepmother often or very often pushed, grabbed, slapped, or had something thrown at her? Or sometimes, often or very often, kicked, bitten, hit with a fist, or hit with something hard? Or ever repeatedly hit at least a few minutes or threatened with a gun or a knife? Unfortunately for Ben, as you can imagine, in a drug culture, the answer was yes, and we're up to 6. Did you live with anyone who was a problem drinker or alcoholic or who used street drugs? Now we're at 7. Was a household member depressed or mentally ill, or did a household member attempt suicide? Unfortunately, Ben can remember at least 3 times that his mother attempted suicide. So now we're at an 8. Did a household member go to prison? And now we're at a 9. So Ben's A score is a 9 out of 10. The study indicates that if you are a 3 or higher, you're at risk. And Ben is a 9. I read an article this weekend that indicated that in Oklahoma, hold on to your hats, folks, because in Oklahoma, those children with an A score of 3 or higher is 45.5%. Almost half of the children in Oklahoma have an A score of 3 or higher. Relate that to your classrooms and your schools. If you have almost half in Oklahoma, you likely have almost half or higher, depending on your community, who have an A score of 3 or higher, putting them at risk. Trauma affects almost everyone. So I'm not a scientist, but this is a brain. And we're going to talk about what happens to our brain under trauma. So this is our brain fully at work. We can use our whole brain when it's fully at work. But when we are in survival mode, we are only using our brain stem, this part right here. Our brain's capacity when we feel fear is only limited to the brain stem. So it's not until somebody feels safe that they can even begin to learn. Ben is operating 100% of the time out of his brain stem. Is that his fault? Is any of it his fault? Not any of it is Ben's fault. He is in survival mode because he's afraid of what he's going to find when he goes home. He's afraid of when his next meal is going to be. He's afraid of what his brothers and sisters are going to do that day and what they're going to need. He's afraid of who's going to be at his house when he goes home. He's afraid of who might come and get him at school. Ben lives in a fear mode all the time. Can Ben learn? Nope, he can't learn because he's only able to survive out of his brainstem. You know, we're going to talk about the circle of security. Children have needs, we know this. And we have to respond with oversight, delight, help, and enjoyment. Then they welcome you into their world, and you become a safe haven, and they feel secure. So it's a big circle. They have needs, we respond, a child welcomes you into their world, they feel safe and secure. The most critical part is our response. Oh, hi. The board is officially smarter than me. Sorry about that. So our response is key in this circle of security. Oversight, delight, help, and enjoyment. I think about a student that had a really hard time. He had probably a pretty high A score that I worked with as a counselor my first year. And this kiddo wore a hat to school every darn day, even though there was no hat policy. Every day, he's wearing a hat to school. And as you can imagine, he has all kinds of negative interactions. So one day, our principal snuck around and followed him. And our principal counted 10 negative interactions with adults before the school day started. There are things like, what's wrong with you? Why are you wearing a hat to school? You know the rules. You know better. You're just doing this to get in trouble. You're just a problem. You're a failure. You're never going to be successful. I mean, those are the kind of things he's hearing every single day, right? So what would happen instead of responding like that? What would happen if this happened? What happened if I go up to the student and said, hey, I am so happy to see you today. Thank you for choosing to come to school. I see that you're wearing a hat. Would it be okay with you if I held onto that hat until the end of the day? Because I don't want you to get in any trouble. I want to keep your hat safe. And then you can come get it at the end of the day. Would that be okay? So what happens if we change to oversight, because I'm still making him follow the rules, right? Delight, I'm delighted to see him. I'm telling him how happy I am he's at school and that I'm glad that he chose to come, which is a choice for a lot of our kids. I've offered him help to hold his hat so he doesn't get in trouble with other people, and I've truly enjoyed my conversation with him. How do you think if our conversations changed to oversight, delight, help, and enjoyment, it would change the culture in our schools? Because then the child welcomes you in and they feel safe and secure, and that's when they can start to learn. So what we have here is the attachment cycle. We have needs expressed and needs met. Over here on the distrust side of the cycle, we have excitatory neurotransmitters and sympathetic nervous system. And on the other side, I'm going to define those for you in a second. On the other side, we have inhibitory neurotransmitters and parasympathetic nervous system, and it's the comfort side. So what does all that mean? Well, our sympathetic nervous system, its primary response is to stimulate the body's flight or fight response. However, the parasympathetic nervous system's primary process is to rest and digest. If you have a classroom full of kids, do you want flight or fight or rest and digest? Rest and digest, right? So we want that parasympathetic nervous system to be in play. We also have the inhibitory neurotransmitters, and those are chemical messengers that transmit messages to your nerves to inhibit you. On the other side of the coin, you have the excitatory neurotransmitters, and those are chemical messengers that transmit messages to your nerves to excite you. Well, we want kids to be excited about what we're teaching. In your classroom, would you rather they be inhibited or excited? Too excited, bouncing off the walls. We want that inhibition so they're making good decisions and able to listen to our lessons. We want them to be over here on the side of comfort. I'm not going to touch the board again. I learned my lesson. When you have a lack of felt safety, it manifests in an emotional deregulation, which is a huge problem for all of us. We program neurosystems of children by helping them regulate, which we have to do. The parasympathetic nervous system has to get exercised, and it all starts with a relationship. You guys hot? Sorry, is that too much for you guys? Okay. Did you know that when a baby is born, he or she is born with the same neurochemical profile as his mother? What is Ben's neurochemical profile? Drug addict, bipolar, probably abused. Is any of that Ben's fault? Nope, not a single one. So what affects neurochemistry? There are three things: nutrition, mental illness, and trauma. Which one can we affect as educators? Nutrition, that's it. That's the only one we can affect change. So how many of you have snack drawers in your office or your classroom? Awesome. Yay for you. If you don't, and you're looking at me like, Michelle, I'm a teacher, I make nothing, I get it. Work with your PTA, work with the church, work with a nonprofit in your community to get snacks donated so you have some where you can help with some nutrition in the classroom. Make sure those kids who are on free and reduced lunch are eating. Do some basic things like that to make sure that nutrition at the very least is being affected and helping to change that neurochemistry. So there are 3 pillars of trauma-informed care. There is felt safety, connection, and self-regulation. Which one do you have the chance of affecting the most? Connection. Connection is what we can affect as educators. Felt safety, maybe a little bit. Self-regulation, we can help them. But connection is the one that's really up to us and the one that we can change. So I'm going to show you a short video of something called the still face experiment. Does somebody in the back mind hitting a light? I don't know where the light switch is, but you mind turning off the light? I want our friends in the other room to be able to see.
Babies this young are extremely responsive to the emotions and the reactivity and the social interaction that they get from the world around them. This is something that we started studying 30, 40 years ago, when people didn't think that infants could engage in social interaction. And the still face experiment what the mother did was she sits down and she's playing with her baby who's about a year of age.
I'm like a girl. Oh.
And she gives a greeting to the baby gives a greeting back to her.
Yeah.
This baby starts pointing at different places in the world, and the mother's trying to engage her and play with her. They're working to coordinate their emotions and their intentions, what they want to do in the world. And that's really what the baby is used to. And then we ask the mother to not respond to the baby. The baby very quickly picks up on this. And then she uses all of her abilities to try and get the mother back. She smiles at the mother. She points because she's used to the mother looking where she points.
Yeah.
The baby puts both hands up in front of her and says, "What's happening here?" She makes that screechy sound at the mother, like, "Come on, why aren't we doing this?" Even in this 2 minutes, when they don't get the normal reaction, they react with negative emotions, they turn away, they feel the stress of it, they actually may lose control of their posture because of the stress that they're experiencing.
Okay. I'm here. And what do you think? Oh, yeah. So good.
It's a little like...
It's hard to watch, isn't it? We're going to leave the lights. We're going to leave them down. I think it'll be better. I know. How did she do that? I couldn't have done it. When you're watching this video, what does it remind you of as an educator? What does it make you think about? Trying to reach kids in a classroom. What else? Say again? How much attention they need. They need to know you're listening.
How much your attitude around them matters.
How your attitude around them matters. And I'm repeating so they can hear you too. So, anything else? Anyone think about this? I know as a mom I did. And my kids are talking to me and I'm like, huh? What'd you say? Little things like that can really make a difference. That video is hard to watch. I get it. But I think it's a really good example of what's happening to our kids and how important our connection with them is and how important it's more than just being physically present, it's being emotionally connected to them. So let's talk about trauma and trust. There are 3 principles: connection, which I love, I'm all about it, empowering, and correction. So did you know that 90% of learning is nonverbal? 90%, y'all. We can look around this room and start to learn nonverbal learning is going on. So just take a second, look around the room. What can you learn about being in this classroom today? And it's summer and it's not even decorated, but what do you know? What can you learn? Home ec classroom, family and consumer sciences, or you pay the penny jar, right? What else do you learn? The air conditioning's not working great. That's a nonverbal thing you're learning, right? Anything else that you're learning?
A bunch of dedicated teachers.
Dedicated teachers who've taken time to decorate their classroom, right? Make it a pleasant place for kids to come in. I would agree with you totally. The teacher whose classroom this is super nice and has been here trying to help me with the air conditioning situation. So I appreciate her. I appreciate the Ada folks. You know, instead of throwing words around, we need to start doing some other tactics. We need to do some nonverbal learning. So 3 things you can do are get on their level, hold hands or touch, and voice modulation. So I have an example. Now, I'm not sure if you know this, but when kids reach puberty, their frontal lobes start to develop, and they become crazy. I talk about my own children because it doesn't break FERPA, so I can talk about them. So I have 2 boys, 15 and almost 13, and when my 13-year-old entered puberty, I thought I had failed as a parent because he was having 2-year-old temper tantrums, which, by the way, is totally normal because his brain is a baby, and so he starts having baby or young youth-like behavior. He reverts. Totally normal. I had to remind myself. My older son went through this too. He did the same thing. So I'd been through this training where I'd learned about this, and I tried it with him. And his first reaction is, what's up with the counselor voodoo? But the second reaction was change. And so he was throwing a fit about something dumb. I don't remember what it was. And he's sitting on the floor. So the first thing I did was I got down on one knee, which I'm not going to do for you now because I'll never get back up. And I put my thumb gently under his chin and my finger on his chin like this, just so I could guide his face to look into my eyes. And I lowered my voice and I started talking to him. Now, this is not a normal reaction for me. I am a yeller by nature. I'm a talk loud person. It pushes my buttons like crazy when my kids throw temper tantrums when it's inappropriate, just like probably for most of us. So this was an abnormal reaction that I was having to his temper tantrum. And he was like, what's going on? But then he calmed down. His behavior went from up here to down here, and we were able to process through the situation together. Another example I have is both my boys had the same pre-K teacher. Her name is Elizabeth Dalma. She's a magician. Not really, but like in a 4-year-old classroom, I think she's magical. I took my older son into her classroom the first time, and she said, hi, it's so nice to meet you. And I had grave concern about her being in a classroom full of 4-year-olds for an entire year because she was so soft-spoken and quiet. But what I learned as I got to know her, as I observed in the classroom, was the quieter she got, the quieter her kids got in the classroom. It was like a magic trick. I could not believe my eyes. The quieter she got, the more softly she spoke, the kids got quieter too, and it worked every single time. It blew my mind. So it makes me know that something as simple as a voice modulation in a situation can totally de-escalate a situation. Some other connection principles, including eliminating their fears, paying attention to their communication. If they stop in your room, their hands on their hips, and they've got a look on their face like this, is that a good time to have a nice conversation with them? Probably not. So probably what needs to happen is you need to have them start to self-regulate, right? Probably a good time to say, hey, what do you need? Do you need some water? You need to go for a walk? Are you hungry? Do you want to splash some cold water on your face? Help them regulate their emotions. Respond flexibly. One example of this is I had a 7th grade boy, 6'5", 300 pounds, huge kid, autistic, who would have meltdowns, and they could get kind of scary because he was a big guy. He also happened to love computers. And so what we would do is we would match behavior. And what we would do is we would lay down on the floor together and become computers. We'd turn ourselves off, and then we'd restart. And my goodness, it worked every time for that kid. He was able to reboot his personal computer and start over. It worked every single time. Be empathetic, which we're going to talk about. I'll show you a video in a second. Strive for emotional balance. You know, I had a person tell me one of the first times I taught this that when he is upset in his classroom, nothing really constructive is happening. So let's say he's had a stressful class right before, and his next class is coming in, and he is not in a good spot. What he does is he says, "Hey guys, I need your help. I need 5 minutes of quiet. Here's some bell work, or here's something for you to do, or I don't care, play on your phone, whatever works." He gets himself regulated emotionally, and then he gets back on it. It is a miracle to watch a kid ask you help in something. When you truly say, I need your help, they want to help. The majority of kids want to do the right thing and help you. So asking for help in a situation like that is a great thing to do. Use your intuition and insight. We have hundreds of years experience in this room. We also have intuition. One of the best pieces of advice I got was to trust my gut. It's also the same thing as a counselor. Trust your gut. If you think something needs to be a certain way, trust that. Listen to that intuition, that insight, and do it. And we talked about helping them regulate. How many of you seen my Brene Brown empathy video? A few of you have. Empathy is putting yourself in somebody else's shoes and imagining how they would feel. And I believe that if we all could be a little bit more empathetic, all the world's problems would be solved. So I want to show you this short video. It defines empathy in under 3 minutes, and hopefully it'll help you see how important empathy is.
They weren't planning to meet each other that night, but they had a love.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, "I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed." And then we look and we say, "Hey, you climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone." Sympathy is, "Ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich?" Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with "at least." And we do it all the time, because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, "I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me." Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
I love that video. It's on YouTube. It's free. You can show it if you go to YouTube and you look up empathy. It'll be the first thing that pops up. Brene Brown is B-R-E-N-E, Brown. I just saw on Facebook today she's releasing a new book. I'm so excited. I love her books. Great nonfiction writing if you're interested. And she didn't even pay me to say that. So empathy is really important. Connection principles: be authoritative, but don't yell or shout. Not always easy, but still important. Make eye contact. Match their behavior. If somebody's acting crazy, what if you act crazy back? It's going to definitely get their attention, isn't it? Unexpected. Playful interaction. One example I have of that is, let's say somebody's being kind of bossy or telling you no. Oh, that's a button pusher for me, right? What if you walked up to them and said, "Are you asking or telling?" With a smile on your face. Oh, I'm telling. I'm telling you not to tell me that anymore. But asking or telling, a playful interaction, and then healthy touch. Could be a fist bump. Could be a high five. Could be a pat on the shoulder. If it's okay with the student, never touch a kiddo who doesn't like to be touched. You need to know that before you do it. Did you know that 90% of the time when a breakdown happens, it happens during a transition? How many transitions do we have every single day? 1 million, right? So who's an elementary person in here? Okay, one of you, how about you? You just walk me through what is a typical day at an elementary in your classroom, in a classroom, about transitions. How many transitions you have? And I'm going to stand close because of my...
Reading, phonics, math, recess, wash hands, bathroom breaks, lunch, playground, morning recess.
Yep. There's a lot.
Yes.
Transitions can be moving from station to station or going to the restroom, all kinds of things. What about a middle school or high school? Who has a middle school or high school teacher in here? Okay. Can you tell, what do you teach?
I teach 5th grade reading and writing, actually, in
Okay.
middle school.
5th grade reading or writing in middle school. Yikes. So is it just 1 hour a day? Do you guys rotate?
Yeah, we rotate.
Okay. So what happens in just 1 hour of your reading class?
We actually have about 3 sections because I read to them, they write in their...
They read, they
write
write.
in their journals, they read their own lesson, they work in their interactive notebooks. I have several transitions in my class, and then they transition from class to class.
Right. So passing periods and then multiple transitions in one lesson in one classroom. Even like a math class where you wouldn't think there would be that many transitions. You've got bell work, you've got lecture, you've got small group work, individual work, maybe one-on-one work with a teacher or a project. You are transitioning kids multiple times all day, every day, all throughout your year. And if we know that transitions are a time when breakdowns happen, then we also know we need to help with that. So what if you created a visual marker? Like something could be having your bell schedule on your wall. It could be having written on your board what you're going to be doing for that day. It could be as simple as writing a few things down on a sticky note and sticking it on that student's desk. Whatever needs to happen for that student to feel more secure in their transitions, help a kid out, help a sister out, right? Help a brother out. Help them out by letting them know what transitions are about to happen. Or let's say you're going to change a seating chart. Hey, I'm going to change a seating chart tomorrow. Just wanted you to be aware. Doing something like that. Other empowering principles, sensory diets. Anybody use a weighted blanket? They're so good, aren't they? Make kids feel safe and secure. Even something like putting a textbook in their lap can be helpful to a kid who feels insecure. We talked about transitions, touch points. A lot of time you're the touch point. They have a connection with you. Maybe they check in with you before school starts, once during the day and at the end of the day. Artifacts. So my younger son got his primary counselor a sock monkey for Christmas one year because he picked it out. He loves her. She's great. And she sent me a note this year. This was about 5 years ago. She sent me a note that said, hey, just want you to know, really it was to my son, that my sock monkey has a job. I have a student who will not go to class unless the sock monkey is with her. So she comes into my office every morning, gets the sock monkey, and they go to class together, and then she brings him back at the end of the day. So having some sort of artifact like that can be really helpful for a student who feels insecure. Rituals, managing hydration and blood sugar, regular physical activity. Y'all don't take away recess when a kid is naughty. Do something different. You could also add it, like maybe you guys do spelling words outside on the sidewalk with chalk, or you walk around the track, whatever it looks like for you. Meeting their nutritional needs, and again, healthy touch. Life value terms include, let's be gentle and kind, or we're gentle and kind in my classroom, or we're gentle and kind here at Ada High School. Use your words, which we say all the time, even to adults sometimes, use your words. And then with respect. So my number one button is when kids are disrespectful of me in front of their peers. It's really the only thing that gets me every time. And I know I have to walk away when that happens. But what would happen instead of going, don't you talk to me like that? What would happen if you said, hey, how about you try that again, but with respect this time? Something really simple where you're still making them follow the rule, but they're doing it with respect. Other proactive strategies include choices. I love Love and Logic. Give as many choices as often as you can. We know that trauma victims need a lot of choices because typically a trauma or an assault or harassment has removed their choice. So giving them choices when you can is great. So if you're, like I said, a seating chart change, what if you did, would you like to sit here or here? Two things you're okay with. There are choices all the time. You think, no, that's not their choice. Give them two choices you can live with. Would you like to be first in line or second in line, or first in line or last in line? Would you like to be the line leader today or tomorrow? Like, give them choices. Even though you know what they might choose, you give them choices. Compromise. I've had students in my office before who are missing class because they're having a panic attack, and I know they need to be in class, and so they'll say, I can't go to English today, Mrs. Sutherland. And I'll say, okay, how about I set the timer for 20 minutes, and we'll see how you're doing and try to go to class then. And they say, I need more than 20 minutes. And I go, okay, what do you need? They say 40. I say, how about 30? We make a compromise. Whatever it looks like for you, you make a compromise. Maybe the student only does the odd numbers of an assignment because they've had a bad day or they're not doing okay at home. Behavioral redos. The example I used in my last session was the difference between 6th graders and 8th graders going to lunch, walking through the lunch line. 8th graders strut through the lunch line because they're cool and they've got to be seen. And 6th graders run. They sprint through the lunch line, right? So when a 6th grader sprints through the lunch line and there's a no running policy, which schools generally have, instead of handing out a detention or a consequence, I would say, hey, how about you walk back to your seat and sit down and then get up and try that again, and this time use your walking feet. It usually took one time for them to get that right after they had to redo a behavior, and we've taught them the correct way to behave at the same time. It's a win-win for everybody. You know, the ideal response should be immediate, 3 seconds or less, direct, efficient, action-based, and leveled at the behavior, not the child. And I just want to remind you about Ben. Were any of the reasons Ben was acting out his fault?
No.
How often do we get angry at a child or dislike a child because of the way they're acting? Right? Typically, it's just not their fault. So we have to change the behavior, address the behavior, not address the child. I've heard some teachers say some pretty nasty things about kids before, which is grossly offensive to me, I'll just be honest. And I've corrected that, said I'm not okay with you saying that. Because it's not the kid's fault. It really isn't. Sometimes at the older levels, they can make a choice to be naughty, but there's still some sort of underlying cause that's happened. So I have a confession to make. I need to tell you the truth about Ben. His name's not really Ben. He's my son, Will. He doesn't have problems. I am not a meth addict. He is a Ben's character was a compilation of kids that I've worked with through my time as a counselor. And Will happens to be really expressive, and his pictures worked great for me to tell a story. So he's a great kid. He did have the frontal lobe issue like other kids his age do, but other than that, he's a great kid. Do you all have any questions, comments, statements? Yes. Yes, all the PowerPoints will be available for Engage OK after Engage OK is over. We have our last conference tomorrow, but then it'll take probably a week to get them up all online. So yes, this will be available. I also come out and will give this to you live. We're on budget restrictions just like schools are, so we like to have a lot of people available to receive the training when I come out, but I do travel to schools to give it. What else? Questions, comments? Sorry it got warm in here again. I don't think the air conditioning's working, do you? No, I know there are a lot of people in here, but I don't think it's working right, so. Okay, last chance, LPC, LMFT, or nurse. You guys have a great day. Yeah. I'm not, but some of my colleagues are, and it'll be a great session.